I don't need the law but the other. I know how to provide for the poor when I'm taking a harvest. Does it very well. She beat out what she had gleaned, and it came to about a bushel of barley. What you would do is you would take the barley and you would hit it with straps, and barley pearls are covered with a thin shell, and the shell breaks off. You toss them in the air, the shells blow away, and then you have the barley pearls. You take them home to be ground. Taking it with her, she went back to the town. Her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned. Ruth also took out what she had kept after eating all she wanted and gave it to her. So she gives her mother-in-law some of the food. She took the food. Remember that she had more than she could eat. So she took the food and brought it home as well as what she gleaned. Her mother-in-law said, "Where have you been gleaning today?" The idea is that obviously she's found a good place. "Where have you been working? Bless the man who took notice of you." And when she says, "Bless the man that took notice of you," she's recognizing that no one gleans this way. No one goes out to glean and comes back with a bushel of finished barley. Something's going on. Ruth told her mother-in-law, in whose field she'd been working, "The name of the man with whom I've been working today," she said, "is Boaz." Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "May he be blessed by Yahweh, who did not withhold his faithful love from the living or the dead." Okay? So Naomi sees that Ruth has been blessed, but again here the blessing comes from God through this man. Okay? But the blessing is from God. And the idea here, this faithful love, when you see faithful love, that's hen hesed again. Okay? So they could call it favor, but here they call it faithful love. This man, Naomi added, is a close relative of ours. He is one of those who has the right of redemption over us. The right of redemption is the right to marry into the family. He's a close enough relative that he could marry Ruth in the same way another child of Naomi could marry Ruth. The thing that's interesting here is that you see the part of the family that is Boaz that is very, very wealthy, and the part of the family that's Naomi is very poor, and yet they're at the same time very, very close relatives. When you read this, you wonder why that part of the family didn't take care of them at the time of the famine rather than they leave, but whatever the way it's set up. Ruth the Moabitess said to her mother-in-law, "He also said, 'Stay with my work people until they've finished my whole harvest.'" And notice it has changed from women. He told her to stay with the women, and she says to stay with the work people. Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, "It is better for you, daughter, to go with his workwomen than to go to some other field where you might be ill-treated." And notice Naomi changes it back to women. Okay? Says work people. He said women. Ruth says work people. Naomi says women. Okay? Enforces the same thing. He says, "So she stayed with Boaz's workwomen and gleaned until the barley and wheat harvests were finished, and she went on living with her mother-in-law." Okay? We talk here about the wheat harvest. The wheat harvest comes after the barley harvest, about 3 weeks. And the difference is that the yield of wheat, the amount of grain you get, is much, much lower than barley, which is why barley was the one that was generally done. And you would see that the size of a grain of wheat and the size of barley. It's kind of obvious. But the fact of the matter is wheat was used by the extremely wealthy people. And so they would harvest part of their fields in wheat, but there was not a big market for it. And so they would do part of it was sold to very wealthy people. It might actually be what Boaz uses in his own home. We don't really know. But barley was the general food that the people used. Chapter 3. Her mother-in-law, Naomi, said, "Daughter, it is not my duty. Is it not my duty to see you happily settled?" Okay? Now, what we were watching earlier was the fact of Ruth's real commitment to Naomi in the whole situation. Once Ruth has made the decision to be with Naomi, then Naomi now feels that she has a real commitment to Ruth. And just as Ruth wants to provide for the future of Naomi, now Naomi wants to provide for the future of Ruth. The future of Naomi is to be cared for. The future of Ruth is to be married. And so now she sees this. "And Boaz, the man with whose workwomen you were, is he not your kinsman? Tonight he will be winnowing the barley on the threshing floor. So wash and perfume yourself, put on your cloak, and go down to the threshing floor." She's not going to work, I should point out. Okay? So what we see now is Naomi is, I guess she's a Yentl. But anyway, what she is doing at this point is matchmaking. And we're going to find out that as we get on, that when Boaz decides that he would like to marry Ruth, he's going to discover that there is a family member of closer relationship. And you have to follow the relationship deal, okay? So she's going. Now, during the winnowing and on the threshing floor, this was not really hard work. What they would do is beat the grains, as I told you, with straps. Then they would toss it in the air, and this is when the whole field's finished. And that was really a party time. They would do that up in they usually had a stone pavement in the field somewhere. And if you read in, like, the book of Gideon, when the pagans or other groups wanted to harass the Jews, they'd light their fields on fire, and the Jews would go out and stand on the stone pavement as the fire went by them. All fields have these big stone pavements just for winnowing the grain, okay? But then you bring all the grain there, you do that, and they do it sort of in a party in the evening. The real harvest is over and stuff like that. So don't let him recognize you while he is eating and drinking. But when he lies down, take note where he lies. Then go and turn back the covering at his feet and lie down yourself. He will tell you what to do, I bet. Ruth said, I shall do everything you tell me. Okay? And again, what we see in this situation is this relationship is supposed to be a union of the two families. And so Naomi is putting it together. Apparently, as we see this, Naomi does not know anyone's closer related, but she sees, the wealthy man and sees how kind he is. And so this is the situation in which she wants to be. I just point out, I don't know if you have ever read this at all, but this is a passage that Sigmund Freud commented on. And Sigmund Freud commented on it largely because of the reference to feet, that oftentimes feet is a euphemism for sexual organs. And so the idea is that, according to Sigmund, that there's something, less than visible going on here. Okay? We're going to see that is the nature of the thing, certainly. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her. When Boaz finished eating and drinking, he went off happily and lay down beside the pile of barley. Ruth then quietly went, turned back the covering at his feet, and lay down. In the middle of the night, he woke up with a shock and looked about him, and there, lying at his feet, was a woman. Okay? Now, what happens is this idea of going to bed and then waking up with a shock, understand that in the harvest there's a lot of drinking and everything. And so that's one of the very things Naomi wanted her to do, was, to wait until he had had enough or more than enough to drink. "Who are you?" he said. And she replied, "I am your servant Ruth. Spread the skirt of your cloak over your servant, for you have the right of redemption over me." Now Naomi had said that, and so this is what Ruth thinks. Ruth thinks that this is the next man in line. The spreading of the cloak over the person is a symbol of engagement. It was oftentimes used, they would exchange an article of clothing. The man would give some article of clothing to the woman, and it was seen as a kind of engagement. He says, "May Yahweh bless you, daughter," he said, "for this second act of faithful love of yours is greater than the first, since you have not run after young men, poor or rich." And so he sees the fact that she is making the advance with regards to marrying him is a continuation of her concern for Naomi. And so he sees this this relationship of faithful love. She is faithful to Naomi. "Don't be afraid, daughter. I shall do everything you ask, since the people at the gate of my town all know that you're a woman of great wealth." The people at the gate of the town are the older people. We would call them the elders. And they basically, would sit at the gate of the town. Everything happened at the gate of the town. Towns were very tight, densely built in order to be protected by a wall. And so there was no space in the town. If you had an area, courts took place right out the front gate. Decisions were made at the front gate. And what we would call like assemblies of people took place at the front gate. There was no place inside. There was only, if you read the texts about Solomon's palace, there was only one really large room in Solomon's palace. And one of the things to know about that time in history, they didn't know how to make the arch. So that room in Solomon's house is called the Forest of Cedars. And the reason why it's called the Forest of Cedars, there's so many pillars inside to hold up a thing. But you couldn't have a gathering like we would in an open area like this. They simply didn't have it. So he says that the people at the gate know who she is, and they know of her significance. Anything that's done legally with regards to engagement, with regards to the proposal of marriage, with regards to any of these things, must be done at the city gate. These elders witness it, and it's basically like buying a marriage license. You remember the story of Ruth now? Ruth has been told by her mother-in-law that she's to go make a play for Boaz. So this is what's going on. 14, so she lay at his feet till morning, but got up the hour before one man can recognize another. And then it goes on, and he thought. But I'd like you to notice this getting up, before people can recognize one another is actually a way of telling time. They used to tell time by when you could begin to see light, and then when you could begin to recognize a person, then when you actually saw the sun. And so it's a way of referencing time. And it must not be known that this woman came to the threshing floor. And so she decided that she would leave there so that people would not know that she was there. This is important, incidentally, to Boaz, too, because of the significance of the other person. You remember there's someone who has an earlier claim on her. And this would be the equivalent of adultery if he were to be involved with her in this knowledge. Okay? He then said, "Let me have the cloak you're wearing. Hold it out." She held it out while he put 6 measures of barley into it and then loaded it onto her. And off she went to the town. Okay? So now she has an excuse for being there. She's been gathering barley. Okay? The amount of barley would indicate she'd been there a long time. When Ruth got home, her mother-in-law asked her, "How did things go with you, daughter?" She then told her everything that the man had done for her. I think one of the things, I don't know if you know what your background is with Scripture, But I read this story, one of the things that this story really calls to mind is the story of Herodias and Salome, and the fact of Herodias's efforts to make sure that Salome, was involved with Herod in an effort ultimately to kill John the Baptizer. But in both cases, notice it's the mother who's really seems to be engineering this. In normal cases, like in both cases, there's no man involved. Herodias's husband is the man she's trying to get involved with her daughter. Great family. And the other one, the husband is not there. So in both cases, the mother has taken over this role of deciding who the person's supposed to marry. So anyway, he gave me 6 measures of barley and said, "You must not go home empty-handed to your mother-in-law." Naomi said, "Do nothing, daughter, until you see how things have gone. I am sure he will not rest until he's settled the matter this very day." So what she has engineered is that Boaz now knows that Ruth is interested in him. And so now he's going to begin to do the work, an effort to end up the one who is responsible for her. Boaz, meanwhile, had gone up to the gate and sat down, and the relative of whom he had spoken came by. Remember the gate? We've mentioned this before. At the gate of a city, everything was conducted at the front gate of a city. It's where you had room to do things. Okay? So Boaz said to him, "Here, my friend, come and sit down." The man came and sat down. Boaz then picked out 10 of the town's elders and said, "Sit down here." And they sat down. This means there's something very official happening. What we need are, witnesses and stuff. So he sets these people down. This would be a good time for the other guy to leave. It says, Boaz then said to the man who had the right of redemption, "Naomi, who has come back from the plains of Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to her brother Amalek. I thought I should tell you about this and say, acquire it in the presence of the men who are sitting here and in the presence of the elders of the people. If you want to use your right of redemption, redeem it. If not, tell me so that I know, for I am the only person to redeem it besides yourself, and I myself come after you." Okay? Now, I've told you before that in the history of Israel, that once the land was divided up, when someone died, the land passed in the family. And if you remember the story of the prodigal son, you remember the younger son gets all the things. Well, the reason is the elder son gets all the real estate. The real estate may not be broken up. It has to pass totally in the family. So what has happened now is this woman's 2 sons are gone. There's no one to carry the name on. What this guy doesn't know is about Ruth. Okay? All he knows is the 2 sons are gone, and in fact, now the land is there. See, it's a very different thing that Ruth is involved. If he indeed buys the land, then the land will become the property of the child of Ruth and will carry the name of Ruth's husband. And so, but he doesn't know this yet. All he sees is property. Okay? The man said, "I am willing to redeem it." Boaz then said, "The day you acquire the field from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of the man who's died, to perpetuate the dead man's name in his inheritance." So you're buying the land, but it won't be your inheritance. It will not pass to your family, to your children. It passes to him. And the idea is he now has a piece of land. If he gets it, it's a piece of land he has to care for, he has to do all this, and he gets absolutely no benefit from. Okay? The man with the right of redemption then said, "I cannot use my right of redemption without jeopardizing my own inheritance. Since I cannot use the right of redemption, exercise the right yourself." Okay? So as soon as he realizes this, that it's not going to pass in his family and this sort of thing, then the next thing he does, well, then you can do it. Okay? Now in former times it was the custom in Israel to confirm a transaction in matters of redemption or inheritance by one of the parties taking off his sandal and giving it to the other. Incidentally, there's no record of this anywhere being a custom in Israel. It may well have been something that was a custom at the time this book was written, so they played it back into the thing. But if it ever was a custom, it was a temporary custom in Israel. We have no record of it in any place. Okay? This is how agreements were ratified in Israel. So that when the man with the right of option said to Boaz, "Acquire it yourself," he took off his sandal. One of the things that you might note, because it's been on the news in the past few years, is the idea of throwing shoes at a person. In the Mideast, that's a real sign of insult, to give someone a shoe or a sandal or whatever. So I'm not quite sure, why it would be that way. Anyway, Boaz then said to the elders and all the people there, "Today you are witnesses that from Naomi I acquire everything that used to belong to Elimelech and everything that used to belong to Mahlon and Childon, and that I am also acquiring Ruth the Moabitess, Mahlon's widow, to be my wife, to perpetuate the dead man's name in his inheritance, so that the dead man's name will not be lost among his brothers and at the gate of his town." Okay? This should tell you a couple things about Boaz. It should tell you Boaz is not the oldest son in his family, because the oldest son in the family can't do this. The oldest son has to keep his name on his own property. Okay? So it tells you, first of all, Boaz isn't the oldest son. The second thing it tells you is about the generosity of Boaz. Boaz is more than willing to take this woman to care for her, to care for the property, all in favor of her son. It'll be his son too, but the child will carry their name in the family. And what you're watching here in Jewish tradition, and I guess maybe as medicine more advances, we might find it's pretty universal. But in Jewish tradition, you are actually the sum of your relatives. And so what they do as they're going through here, remember, these are the ancestors of David. A woman who, once she married this man, even though the man died and the hopes died, she was willing to stand by the commitment to the family in all this. And Boaz, a man who's willing to turn his back on what it will be for him in order to see all of this is rectified. Now the main thing is, this is the type of person that David is. That's the whole book's about this. This is the type of person David is, because these are David's relatives. Okay? "Today you are witnesses to this." All the people at the gate said, "We're witnesses." The elders said, "May Yahweh make the woman about to enter your family like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. Grow mighty in Ephraim, be renowned in Bethlehem." Okay? Now Bethlehem is one of the Judean cities, not a very big city, not a very important city, except it will be the city where David is born. Okay? So this is going to be very important to them. Okay? "And through the children Yahweh will give you by this young woman, may your family be like the family of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah." Okay? And again, they look back at one of the great histories and are always calling to mind the whole business of the family, because this is what the book's about, really. So Boaz took Ruth, she became his wife, and when they came together, Yahweh made her conceive, she bore a son. And the woman said to Naomi, "Blessed be God, who has not left you today without anyone to redeem you. May his name be praised in Israel." And that the birth of the child then is also someone who can care for Naomi and take care of the family and this sort of thing. So they see this as a great blessing all the way around. It's, I guess, what we would call here a win-win situation. That what we've watched is some people who made some very serious sacrifices. Ruth made a very serious sacrifice in leaving, basically, her own country. And Boaz has made a very serious sacrifice about his own belongings and everything in entering into this relationship. Because see, Boaz isn't married, so the things he has will all go to that child. And so they both made these very, very serious sacrifices, and yet ultimately it works out for everyone's benefit. It'll work out for the benefit of Boaz, Ruth, and ultimately for the benefit of all Israel. And this is one of the themes that we see play basically through wisdom literature. Israel is best served by the person who serves God first. Okay, so if you're an Israeli and you really want to serve Israel, you serve God first. Okay? So the child will be a comfort to you and the prop of your old age, for he's been born to a daughter-in-law who loves you and is more to you than 7 sons. Okay? And the 7 being the number of completeness. So the idea is that this child is important, basically because the child will be trained to love Naomi because of the daughter. Naomi, taking the child, held him to her breast, and she it was who looked after him. A rather normal thing in the Mideast. Naomi is the one who basically raises the child. Okay? The women of the neighborhood gave him a name. A son, they said, has been born to Naomi, and they called him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. Okay? So the idea is that they have this special son. The next thing, you may remember this. I'll go through it just for a second, but you may well remember this from the Gospel of Matthew, actually. These are the descendants of Perez. Perez fathered Hezron. Hezron fathered Ram. Ram fathered Amminadab. Amminadab fathered Nahshon. Nahshon fathered Salmon. Salmon fathered Boaz. Boaz fathered Obed. Obed fathered Jesse. Jesse fathered David. Now, when it goes on from there, it goes on, next one, Solomon and stuff like that. But this is up to David. And again, the whole thing of the book is to look back at the ancestors of David. When David came on the scene, do you remember that David was not of the kingly family? He was not of an important family. If they had been, like European royalty or something, they would have retained this stuff all along. But if you remember, the Jews had no king originally. And so they pestered God for a king. And finally God gave them Saul. And Saul is sort of a transitional character. God raised up charismatic leaders for them, and then they demanded a king. So God raised up Saul, who was kind of this charismatic leader, although they called him a king. But his father never reigned, and his son never did. So he's not really a dynasty. He's just an individual. David, then, is a true king. His children will follow on. But he has no ancestry. So what they started doing was constructing this ancestry around individuals. And I would be willing to bet that they carried in their tradition 2 or 3 of the stories that are involved here, and then they put them together with regards to Ruth. And I do think there's stories that concerned Ruth, but they had these stories about Ruth. It's just they weren't important a long time. If they had been important stories, they would actually have appeared in the books of Kings. But they weren't important.